What is up, and welcome to another edition of the Mile High Hoops podcast. As always, I am your host, Zach Bai, and as always, I appreciate you spending a sliver of your busy day with me here on the podcast, reacting to a very disappointing loss at Ball Arena on Tuesday night, but more importantly, looking ahead to a mega matchup against the Boston Celtics later this evening. Not going to spend too much time on the loss to the Phoenix Suns, but I do want to just pay it off because we have not spoken since then. Just the way that it worked out this week, us recording on Tuesdays and Thursdays, is that those games, Phoenix and Boston, are Tuesday and Thursday. So we sort of have a chance to look ahead, but are delayed in reacting to the game. But I do have a couple thoughts before we shift gears to Boston. Super disappointing with the approach from Denver. And my only reason for the lackluster competitive spirit that Denver didn't bring in the first half, that second quarter in particular, is the mental and natural human element of letting down after you're not going to play against Devin Booker. I mean, that guy's 28 points a game. That guy's a top 10 player in the NBA. And it's much like the getting the news before tip-off that Embiid's not going to play. And not quite the same because we knew in advance that Booker wasn't going to play. But there's just like this natural human element. And then there's also like three other guys missing too, and role players, maybe two other guys. I just think there's a natural let-up after the emotional tax that was paid in the previous 6 games. Like, it's just going to be impossible to get up emotionally 82 times. It's just impossible. And I know as paying customers for sure on Thursday night and fans, we want to see max effort all the time from guys who get paid, millions and millions and millions of dollars to play a kid's game. Unfortunately, that's just not the way the NBA works. And been around too many times around the sun to have that expectation. And man, I thought they were going to win. I thought they had a chance to blow them out going into the game if their mind was right. But I remember saying after transitioning from the podcast to my radio show, The Drive, from 2 to 6 weekdays on the Fan with Philip Lindsay, I remember saying every time we talked about it, like, my one caveat if stuff doesn't go right tonight is if the competitive mindset isn't tightly wound the way that it should be. And it wasn't. Next thing you know, you're down 22 points. You're down 15 points at halftime. And Phoenix played well. I mean, give them credit, I guess. Although they absolutely collapsed in the fourth quarter, as they're known to do, worst fourth quarter team in the NBA. And when Denver came back and pulled ahead, I said, oh my God, they're going to win. And you looked at the situation when we talk about clutch, what a clutch team Denver is. Not in terms of clutch, like making a final shot, but of like clutch time, 5 minutes or less, within 5 points or less. And when they reset that clock to 5 and that game went into overtime, I said, these guys are definitely going to win this game. And actually I bet them live on the money line, just like certain that they were going to win that game, and lost some money because not only did they lose in overtime, you normally don't see a team lose by double figures in overtime. That's exactly what happened. First 2 possessions for Denver, turnover. First possession for Phoenix, Eubanks dunk, Durant 3. You're down 5 in 1 minute and 15 seconds, and it just flipped and spiraled, and they could never get it back. But I don't have an overarching takeaway from the game because the competitive spirit was lacking. The one spot that I was like, you got to look beyond the raw nature of the game or even the shooting numbers. Was Peyton Watson. Peyton Watson is one of the most intriguing, I think, young players you can watch in the NBA. And if you're just looking at, if you're wired just like offensively and you put more emphasis in offense than defense, and I know some people do, and they have just unconscious bias of like whatever, of like as if one side of the floor has more value to it. I'm sure there's arguments to be made. But when you look at that defensive side of the floor with Peyton Watson, this dude continues to just flash defensively in a way that if you're using your imagination and are paying attention to the right things, I believe, and I talked about this on the radio in the morning after the game or the day after the game, Peyton Watson can be a $100 million NBA player. I really believe that with every ounce of me. I think he can be a $100 million NBA player. And as often as we look at Michael Porter Jr. and his offense and how it can sort of be a reflection of the Nuggets' ceiling over this championship arc that we hope is around for many years, and we've referred to like him being a reflection of that ceiling. I think you can say the same thing defensively about Peyton Watson. I mean, this dude has the goods. He really does. And although he did not play well offensively the other night, he went 0 for 5 from 3, and some of the misses, just the time in which they came, and you can say that across the board for the Nuggets the other night. The amount of open threes that they missed in transition that would have just blew the top off Ball Arena, it's like 14 to 16 of them, and Peyton Watson had a few. But when you look at actually the defensive possessions and some of the ways that he made Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal feel, you got to use your imagination a little bit because he's 21 years old. He's a kid, all right? But I'm looking forecasting over the next 3 to 4 years. Man, he's got the goods, man. He's got the goods. So I wanted to shoehorn that in before we move on to talk about the Boston Celtics. Just looking at my notes here. We're not going to spend too much time because I know some of you guys are going to hear this after the game is played. And I want to make sure I say this before we get into sort of the dynamics between Denver and Boston. The stuff that we're about to talk about isn't only tied into the game on Thursday night. All right. So if you're hearing this after the fact, this is bigger picture stuff in the dynamic between these two and what could be an NBA Finals preview. If I had to guess right now, I would say it is. I think these are the two best teams in the NBA. I don't think anyone's catching Boston. I don't think anyone's beating Boston 4 times in the playoffs. If they do, I have a hypothesis why that would happen that we're going to get into here in a second. But this is not Thursday night specific, so I just want to make sure I say that before we push forward. In terms of the Celtics, big picture, what we are watching right now is one of the great regular season teams that we have seen, like in recent memory. They are that good, all right? And they're coming off a loss against Cleveland in which they were up by 22 points. It should have never happened. And a player by the name of Dean Wade ends up going crazy. I know Dean Wade, followed him at Kansas State, could never stay healthy. My cousin was the director of basketball operations, Drew Sparrow, whose father was Kirk Sparrow, who was a longtime coach at Central Florida. Drew played for his dad at Central Florida, married my cousin Jamie. So I followed that program for a while, met up with them at Ball Arena a couple years ago when Bruce Weber was still there, and watched Dean Wade go crazy. So I was super happy for him. But that totally aside, that loss should have never happened. The Celtics blew that loss. They blew it in the same way that, say, the Nuggets blew the last game before the All-Star break against Sacramento. Okay, and they should be on a 12-game win streak. But look at the win streak that they did have. This is a team that didn't lose a game in a month. They went a month without losing a game. All right, and the All-Star break was in there too, so that deserves to get mentioned. But during that 11-game win streak, the Boston Celtics outscored their opponents by an NBA record over an 11-game span by 243 points. Think about that. Over 11 games, they beat their opponents by hundreds of points. It's unusual. It's fantastic. That fan base is going nuts right now. They currently have the number 1 total offense and number 2 total defense in the NBA. Only 2 teams in the last 24 years have finished top 2 or finished 1 and 2 in both of those categories. And the 2 teams are the 2015 Warriors and the 2017 Warriors. All right. So it's rarefied air. And look at their scoring margin. They're currently outscoring their opponents by 11.3 points per 100 possessions. That is insane. There's only been 3 teams to ever have a better mark than that. It was those same 2017 Warriors. It was the 1996 Bulls and the 1997 Bulls. Those are like some of the greatest teams in NBA history, literally. Those are the only 2 NBA cores to ever win 70 games or more. It's just they are having some kind of regular season. And this is why Las Vegas and the odds makers around the country with FanDuel and DraftKings and Superbook, they have the Celtics still as a bona fide favorite to win the championship. Bona fide, all right? Even with the reigning champ status that Denver has, who went into Boston and gave them their first home loss, the Celtics are still an overwhelming favorite to win it all. Look, go pull up their odds and what their chances are to come out of the East. It's ridiculous. It's like minus money to a degree where it's not even worth betting because you're not going to make any money on it. That's how much of a favorite they are, and their path is so much easier than Denver's. They are fantastic. All right, so let's just be aware they're not unbeatable. We already seen Denver beat them in Boston, and I think they're going to win tonight. I do. Jaylen Brown is questionable for the game. Has a pelvis injury that makes it hard for like pivoting and cutting and stuff like that. So at the time of recording, we don't know he's going to play, but I am going to assume he does play. And honestly, I want him to play. I do. I want him to play. I want these guys to play. Greg Popovich always said, we talked about this on Tuesday, you want their dudes playing so your competitive spirit and mind is right in a way that it wasn't on Tuesday. In terms of the dynamic of the Celtics, outside some of the numbers, they're freaking awesome. They can basically like switch, damn near 1 through 5. They have a really good, they have size. Porzingis changes the dynamic of their team. They have shooters. They can all shoot it. All right. 1 through 5. They can switch almost everything. And then the combination of Drew Holiday and Derek White defensively on Jamal Murray is really going to be something to watch. They're going to make life difficult. They are. And even Al Horford traditionally has been a really good post defender. And it's going to be interesting what the dynamics are there. I can tell you I've already bet Nikola Jokic over 25.5 points. He's cleared this 13 times against the Celtics. So I think we could be in for a big Jokic night. We'll see. There's no promises there, obviously. I'm just speaking for myself. I think it's going to be a hell of a basketball game. Your finals preview? Maybe not. We'll see. That's a long way away from now. But these are what I believe is the two best teams in the NBA, and I am absolutely fascinated with the matchup. I am going to be at Ball Arena for this one. If you see me anytime there, go ahead and say hello. Love meeting the listeners of the Mile High Hoops podcast. And then one other thing that I wanted to shoehorn in here before we say goodbye is Karl Anthony Towns, meniscus injury, massive blow to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I've gone through that injury. There's two types of meniscus injuries. There's the cleanup job, and then there's the full-blown job. If you got the full-blown job, it's not an ACL, but it's also not the cleanup job either. It's somewhere in between, and it's directly impacted the championship title odds for Minnesota. They're much more of a long shot now, and we don't know what is next in that department for Cat, but it was definitely worth mentioning. And when we come back in here next week, we'll have more information and be able to talk maybe a little bit more expansively about it. So, guys, I hope you enjoy the game on Thursday night on national TV. Everyone will be able to watch, which always makes me happy. And regardless of what happens on Thursday night against the Boston Celtics and over the weekend, we'll be back on Tuesday talking about it right here